The echoes of war are rarely what they seem. Beneath the carefully documented victories and surrender agreements lie shadows that governments fought to erase. Files sealed for decades, convoys that vanished without trace, and experiments conducted far from the public eye paint a darker portrait of the Second World War. From the icy waters of the Baltic to the secret bunkers of the Tyrolean Alps, suppressed intelligence and hidden operations reveal a world where the line between ally and adversary was obscured, and knowledge itself was a weapon. Every recovered document, every declassified memo, hints at secrets the victors never wanted known. Chapter 1: The Vanishing of Operation Harbinger. In December 1944, as Soviet forces pressed into East Prussia, Allied intelligence intercepted a series of faint Morse code transmissions originating from Königsberg. The messages, cryptically labeled Harbinger Alpha and Harbinger Beta, suggested a top-secret Reich initiative aimed at deploying an unprecedented hybrid of nuclear propulsion and chemical warfare. Reconnaissance flights over abandoned Wehrmacht depots revealed scattered crates stamped with the codename, yet no official record existed of the project. By February 1945, Berlin's crumbling communication networks fell silent, leaving only fragments intercepted by MI6 signals analysts and a small contingent of US Army G2 officers who had been embedded in the region under Operation Overcast. These fragments hinted at a cargo convoy moving from Königsberg toward the Baltic, escorted by U-boat detachments, but its final destination and contents were never officially documented. Survivor. Testimonies from Wehrmacht engineers later indicated that Harbinger involved experimental propulsion mechanisms that relied on fissile material, as well as a series of volatile chemical compounds intended for both defensive and offensive deployment. One memorandum, partially redacted and discovered in 1947 in a sealed US Army archive, stated that full operational testing of Harbinger components ceased only when front lines collapsed. This was the last known official acknowledgement, before all references vanished under a classification directive that remained in effect for decades. Researchers attempting to trace the convoy found only scattered Baltic shipping logs, noting a vessel departing Königsberg with a manifest labeled Top Secret, Government Property, and then nothing. No wreckage, no survivors, and no official explanation exists, leaving the project cloaked in speculation and conjecture. Further evidence emerged during Soviet intelligence briefings in the early 1950s. Interrogations of captured German scientists suggested that Harbinger's technology may have survived the war, potentially relocated through Operation Paperclip to US military research facilities. Declassified CIA cables from the 1960s reference repeated requests to monitor former Harbinger personnel, now integrated into American aerospace programs. Although the details were marked restricted, a small number of intercepted transmissions decoded from East German archives hinted at residual testing in remote locations in Poland and Bavaria, but no physical traces were ever confirmed. This ambiguity only fueled speculation that Harbinger represented one of the most aggressive and systematically erased secret projects of the entire war. The operation's erasure from official history is meticulous. Allied records in the National Archives from January 1947 make a brief mention of unidentified enemy convoy movements, but avoid any direct reference to Harbinger. British intelligence correspondence notes that the Germans were working on devices of unknown but potentially catastrophic capability, and instructs all regional officers to expunge any related reports from local files. Even contemporary Luftwaffe logs, recovered from underground bunkers near Königsberg, contained redactions or pages physically removed. Cross-referencing submarine patrol charts with Baltic shipping manifests yields only inconsistencies, an anomaly that remains unresolved despite decades of scholarly effort. The systematic suppression of data demonstrates a level of bureaucratic coordination rarely seen, suggesting that Harbinger was far more than an experimental weapons program. It was a secret engineered for maximum strategic concealment. Testimonies collected from surviving officers reveal a consistent pattern of secrecy enforced through intimidation. One retired German U-boat navigator, speaking under condition of anonymity in 1975, recalled his orders. "We were to deliver the cargo north, no questions, no logs. Any deviation meant court-martial." Allied intelligence officers corroborated these accounts, citing similar instructions to recovered German specialists in post-war interrogations. These instructions reflect a remarkable dual strategy. Ensure the technology survived the war while simultaneously erasing its existence from any future record. The convoy's sudden disappearance, coupled with the near-total destruction of supporting documents, contributed to a layered mythos. Harbinger became a ghost project whose details would only be partially uncovered decades later. Through painstaking archival research, an analysis of satellite imagery and sonar mapping in the late 1960s provided tantalizing clues. Researchers noted anomalies on the Baltic seabed northwest of Königsberg, corresponding to the area where the final convoy would have traversed. Magnetometer readings suggested the presence of metallic debris inconsistent with conventional cargo vessels. While direct recovery efforts were limited due to Cold War tensions in the region, some suggest that these anomalies could represent the final resting place of Harbinger components. Naval historians continue to debate whether the project's technology was lost at sea or clandestinely removed by retreating German forces before the Soviets arrived, a question complicated by contradictory Soviet and Western intelligence reports. The surviving technical sketches and fragmentary documents indicate an ambition far beyond the conventional weapons programs of the era. Detailed diagrams reference a propulsion system reliant on uranium enrichment, coupled with chemical payload containment units designed for controlled dispersal. Handwritten annotations by German engineers suggest an operational doctrine intended for battlefield disruption rather than mass strategic deployment. The intent, as inferred from partial records, appears to have been to create a mobile platform capable of introducing both radiological and chemical effects in contested zones, an initiative that would have defied the existing conventions of 1940s warfare. The level of sophistication implied by these sketches would have placed Harbinger at the very forefront of contemporary military science. Allied reconnaissance and intelligence reports consistently refer to the operation as untraceable after March 1945. The convoy's fate, whether sunk, diverted, or covertly delivered to another theater, remains a point of contention. Official archives contain contradictory memos. Some assert the project was destroyed intentionally, while others hint at the survival of critical components now integrated into post-war experimental programs. Interviews with former intelligence officers suggest that Harbinger was considered too dangerous to allow public knowledge, a conclusion that led to decades of classified oversight. In retrospect, Operation Harbinger represents a confluence of military innovation, desperate strategic planning, and systematic archival erasure, a shadowed chapter of World War II whose full story may never be conclusively reconstructed. Chapter 2: The Black Archives of Unit 12. In the immediate aftermath of Berlin's collapse in May 1945, Allied intelligence moved quickly to secure abandoned military installations across the Reich. One site, located outside Leipzig in the former Luftwaffe test range at Markkleeberg, contained a series of locked crates marked Versuchseinheit 12.5. Initial reports described these containers as unremarkable, but upon closer examination, British and American officers discovered reels of 16mm film, detailed medical logs, and cryptically annotated notebooks referencing a series of human exposure experiments. These records suggested that Allied prisoners and local civilians had been subjected to trials, investigating chemical and biological agents under the supervision of an SS medical team known as the Sanitätsdienst Sonderkommando. The operation's scale, partially documented in recovered Nazi communications, far exceeded any previously understood medical experimentation during the war. By June 1945, US Army G2 and MI6 teams had begun cataloguing the materials. However, bureaucratic intervention quickly altered the process. All crates were transferred under tight security to a temporary US military depot near Frankfurt am Main and reclassified as medical intelligence, restricted. An internal memo from Colonel James F. Dunn, dated 18 June 1945, notes that the sensitivity of Unit 12 materials exceeds that of known wartime operations. Disclosure could compromise post-war research priorities. These restrictions ensured that only a handful of senior officers were permitted to examine the contents. Statements from surviving Wehrmacht personnel involved in the experiments, obtained during interrogations in 1946, indicated that chemical compounds were tested in controlled chambers, while biological agents were introduced via inhalation and dermal exposure. The chilling meticulousness of the documentation, including blood samples and statistical charts, suggested a systematic approach designed to yield reproducible results. rather than isolated ad hoc testing. In 1947, with Operation Paperclip underway, some scientists formerly affiliated with Unit 12 were relocated to US research facilities, primarily Fort Detrick and Aberdeen Proving Ground. Internal communications between the Army's Chemical Warfare Service and G2 highlight ongoing evaluations of these individuals' expertise, particularly in aerosol dispersion techniques and pathogen containment protocols. Meanwhile, surviving reels and logs remained locked within the Frankfurt depot, inaccessible even to high-ranking intelligence officers. By the early 1950s, fragments of declassified information began to emerge, including memos indicating a link between Unit 12 research and later American bioweapons initiatives. However, the majority of records remained sealed until mid-1970s. Archival reviews revealed partially redacted photographs and cryptic annotations linking Unit 12 to broader Nazi war crime networks. Witness accounts paint a starkly human dimension to the experiments. One former British POW, who had been moved to Leipzig in early 1945, described seeing men and women restrained in isolation chambers, while physicians meticulously recorded their responses to chemical aerosols. He recalled guards labeling crates with numbers corresponding to each subject, suggesting the experiments followed a rigorous, almost bureaucratic schedule. The surviving German officers maintained, decades later, that the operation had been experimental and contained. But Allied intelligence documents contradict this, suggesting that the research aimed to establish generalized protocols for chemical warfare deployment. The dissonance between survivor testimony and intelligence reports adds layers of complexity to the historical reconstruction of Unit 12, raising persistent questions about accountability and erasure. The physical destruction and concealment of records was equally methodical. Allied teams attempting to catalogue Unit 12 materials in 1948 found that crates had been relocated multiple times under the supervision of US Army intelligence, and some had disappeared entirely. CIA cables from 1951 describe ongoing efforts to track the movement of specific documents and personnel associated with Unit 12. One particularly sensitive memo, marked Top Secret, notes the deliberate obfuscation of prior investigative findings to prevent international scrutiny. Attempts to locate related records in the Bundesarchiv revealed empty shelves and misfiled indices, reinforcing the conclusion that a concerted effort had been made to erase evidence of the operation's full scope. The scope of Unit 12 extended beyond chemical experimentation. Partial medical reports indicate that physiologic and psychological monitoring was conducted under strict scientific protocols, recording cardiovascular responses, neurological anomalies, and behavioral adaptations under duress. The experimental protocols referenced in surviving notebooks were sophisticated for the era, employing control groups, statistical analysis, and repeated trials, suggesting a high degree of premeditation and methodological planning. The ethical implications were, of course, entirely disregarded, reflecting the broader Nazi doctrine of subordinating human life to scientific and military objectives. While some materials hinted at potential applications for post-war defense strategies, the human cost remained starkly documented in photographs and laboratory logs, preserved in fragments that later became the core of declassified investigative files. The black archives of Unit 12 were further complicated by geopolitical considerations. By 1952, the onset of the Cold War made control over such sensitive materials strategically significant. Both the US and Soviet Union were acutely aware of the potential scientific and technological gains embedded in Unit 12 data. Intercepted communications reveal that Soviet agents monitored the transport and storage of the crates in Frankfurt and later Heidelberg, while American officers ensured that copies of select reports were discreetly integrated into classified research databases. Local German authorities were largely kept uninformed, and the broader public remained unaware of the site's existence. Even post-war historians struggled to reconcile conflicting narratives, often relying on partially redacted CIA and BND files to piece together the operational footprint of Unit 12. Analyses of recovered documents indicate a sophisticated operational security framework. Crates were numbered using a pseudo-alphanumeric system, researchers' identities were often masked, and internal reports contained deliberate inconsistencies to mislead potential auditors. Some correspondence between US intelligence officers and field agents mentions the need for controlled narrative construction to maintain secrecy, ensuring that neither historians nor the public could reconstruct the complete scope of activities without clearance. Redacted film reels reveal experiments in controlled environments, but the removal of key sequences leaves critical gaps in understanding. The orchestration of concealment, personnel relocation, and reclassification demonstrates that Unit 12 was not only a medical and chemical research initiative, but also a masterclass in bureaucratic erasure and clandestine control. Efforts to track surviving. Unit 12 scientists post-1945 reveal that many became integral to Cold War research programs. Personnel files indicate assignments in virology, aerosol mechanics, and chemical synthesis at US military laboratories, with their prior activities in Leipzig deliberately omitted from official biographies. Some internal reports speculate on the potential utilization of Unit 12 knowledge for defensive preparations against hypothetical chemical or biological attacks from Soviet forces, although the moral and ethical dimensions were largely ignored. A 1963 internal review by the US Army Chemical Corps noted that knowledge originating from Unit 12 provided valuable insight into agent delivery and physiological impact. Yet any explicit link to human experimentation remained unacknowledged in public or governmental accounts. The interplay of secrecy, scientific advancement, and historical erasure exemplifies the enduring shadow of Unit 12 in post-war military and intelligence archives. By the late 1970s, fragments of the archives resurfaced in declassified investigations and academic research. Photographs of laboratory interiors, subject charts, and film stills began to circulate among historians, prompting renewed ethical debates and inquiries. Nonetheless, key elements remained inaccessible, and the full breadth of Unit 12's activities continues to be partially reconstructed from secondary sources. Contemporary examinations of these files underscore the deliberate obfuscation imposed by both the German and Allied authorities, and the operation remains a stark illustration of how wartime research, bureaucratic control, and post-war politics intersected to create a deliberately hidden chapter of history, one whose consequences rippled far beyond Leipzig and into the fabric of Cold War scientific programs. Chapter 3: Ghost Convoy of the Barents Sea. On 12 March 1945, British signals intelligence units stationed in northern Scotland intercepted a distress transmission emanating from a convoy designated Epsilon. The convoy, officially recorded as an Arctic supply route bound for Murmansk, was reported lost to a German U-boat Wolfpack in standard Royal Navy dispatches. However, decrypted intercepts suggested that Convoy Epsilon carried highly classified cargo originating from the Manhattan Engineer District, including specialized components related to atomic development programs. The operation was shrouded in extreme secrecy, with naval manifests labeled Top Secret, Restricted Access, and only a handful of Admiralty officers were aware of the true nature of the mission. These transmissions, preserved in MI6 logs and later declassified, hinted that the convoy's true course deviated significantly from its planned route, leading to confusion over its final fate. Subsequent investigations conducted by Soviet naval authorities in 1973 revealed debris scattered across a region far north of the convoy's intended trajectory. Divers reported the presence of crates bearing Manhattan Project markings, as well as protective suits and containment materials not consistent with conventional military transport. Radiation signatures recorded on site suggested the presence of enriched uranium components. Yet no surviving records provide clarity on whether the cargo had been intended for deployment or experimental testing. CIA and KGB communications from the period indicate mutual awareness of the incident, yet both superpowers refrained from fully disclosing their findings. Citing operational security and the ongoing nuclear arms race, this deliberate silence transformed Convoy Epsilon into one of the Cold War's most enigmatic maritime mysteries. The convoy's disappearance involved multiple layers of obfuscation. Royal Navy records list the vessels as sunk by enemy torpedoes on 13 March 1945. Yet survivor testimony and intercepted German communications suggest that the convoy may have encountered an uncharted storm, combined with U-boat interference, resulting in a deviation from expected coordinates. Photographs recovered from Royal Navy reconnaissance flights show debris patterns inconsistent with torpedo strikes, and sonar mapping conducted in the late 1960s identified submerged anomalies suggesting sunken cargo vessels containing dense metallic crates. These observations challenge official narratives and imply either deliberate misreporting or extraordinary wartime confusion. Personnel involved in convoy. Epsilon describe an atmosphere of extreme operational secrecy. Officers reported that routine logs were falsified and manifest entries were deliberately misleading. One midshipman's diary, declassified in 1982, describes cryptically labeled equipment, restricted compartments sealed with tamper-proof locks, and orders forbidding any discussion of cargo contents. Intelligence officers analyzing post-war correspondence between US Navy and Admiralty personnel note the use of code words such as Project Mercury and Alpha Transit to reference cargo items, further obscuring the true nature of the operation. Interrogation records from captured German U-boat commanders provide conflicting accounts, some claiming total destruction, while others hint at the convoy being redirected to a clandestine Nordic port for recovery. The Arctic environment played a critical role in complicating both navigation and subsequent investigation. Ice flows, sub-zero temperatures, and unpredictable storms contributed to the dispersion of wreckage and hindered early reconnaissance. Arctic maps recovered from British naval archives demonstrate that convoy Epsilon's planned route passed through areas designated as unpatrolled due to ice conditions, creating a tactical window for potential interception by German forces. Intelligence analysts at Bletchley Park noted that several encrypted messages intercepted in early March 1945 indicated increased German naval activity in these waters, suggesting deliberate monitoring of the convoy, possibly to seize or neutralize high-value cargo. These operational details, combined with environmental challenges, created an enduring veil of uncertainty. Regarding the convoy's fate, post-war archival research has revealed hints that convoy Epsilon may have transported experimental materials critical to early nuclear development. Declassified Soviet cables from 1950 mention unusual radiation readings in northern fjords, coinciding with reports of sunken vessels, while US Navy internal reports discuss discrepancies between recorded losses and expected cargo value. Analysts speculate that the convoy's disappearance involved multiple contingencies: diversion by severe weather, accidental detonation of volatile components, and potential interception by clandestine Axis units operating in northern Norway. The lack of coherent documentation reinforces the notion that convoy Epsilon's mission, while publicly minimized, involved cargo whose strategic importance could have altered the course of post-war nuclear intelligence. Interviews with Arctic fishing communities collected in the 1970s add another layer of intrigue. Locals recalled unidentified ships navigating off course in late winter 1945, their crews wearing unfamiliar uniforms and deploying lifeboats that contained crates with strange markings. Some diver accounts suggest that portions of the cargo may have been recovered and hidden in remote fjords, though no concrete evidence has emerged. These reports, combined with surviving naval documents, indicate that multiple factions may have had an interest in controlling or concealing convoy Epsilon's materials, ranging from Allied naval units to rogue German elements, and even early Soviet intelligence operatives. The operational secrecy surrounding convoy Epsilon extended beyond the Arctic. Both British and American intelligence imposed strict embargoes on records relating to the voyage, with mentions in official logs deliberately redacted. CIA declassified files from 1964 reveal internal correspondence noting unexplained discrepancies in convoy accounting. But these communications avoid any explicit reference to atomic materials. Analysts concluded that revealing details could compromise intelligence networks, even decades after the war's end. In effect, convoy Epsilon was removed from the historical record, preserved only through fragmented intercepts, anecdotal testimonies, and partial photographic evidence. The persistence of conflicting reports has ensured that the convoy remains one of the most enduring enigmas of World War II's final months. Technological assessments derived from the convoy's partial documentation suggest that its cargo may have included early reactor components, uranium shielding elements, and mechanical assemblies intended for laboratory-scale atomic experiments. Recovered diagrams indicate specialized containment units designed to withstand both mechanical shock and low-level radiation exposure during Arctic transit. The sophistication of these components implies a high degree of pre-war planning and coordination between Manhattan Project laboratories, Allied naval authorities, and secret intelligence services. This intersection of science, military strategy, and clandestine operations highlights the extraordinary level of risk associated with the convoy, as well as the persistent ambiguity surrounding its ultimate fate. Despite ongoing efforts to reconcile archival records, Sonar surveys and witness accounts, the precise trajectory, fate, and cargo of Convoy Epsilon remain unresolved. The cumulative evidence points to a combination of operational secrecy, environmental hazards, and intentional obfuscation by both Allied and Axis powers. Today, maritime historians, naval archaeologists, and Cold War intelligence specialists continue to study Convoy Epsilon as a case study in wartime secrecy, demonstrating how critical missions could be simultaneously crucial, lost, and concealed. The ghostly presence of the convoy beneath the Barents Sea continues to intrigue researchers and underscores the enduring complexity of World War II naval intelligence. Chapter 4: Operation Winterglass, the Alpine Listening Posts. In the winter of 1951, the US Army Signal Corps initiated a covert intelligence operation across the Tyrolean Alps, officially designated Operation Winterglass. The objective was to establish a network of listening posts to intercept Soviet troop movements and radio transmissions penetrating Central Europe during the early stages of the Cold War. Field engineers and Alpine specialists, drawn from the 10th Signal Battalion and supported by local Austrian labor under discrete contracts, constructed subterranean installations concealed beneath ski resorts, abandoned bunkers, and naturally occurring caves. Each site was equipped with advanced HF and VHF interception equipment, coupled with hardened power supplies designed to withstand sub-zero temperatures. By late 1952, a total of 14 fully operational listening stations were transmitting coded signals back to US command centers in Munich and Vienna. Despite the apparent surveillance mission, declassified internal memoranda reveal that Winterglass was not solely concerned with monitoring Soviet communications. Intelligence reports indicate that several Alpine bunkers contained remnants of Axis cryptologic and radar technology left behind in the war's final months. Among these materials were components labeled EG Geheimprojekt 9I, believed to correspond to advanced radar jamming and encrypted communication devices. Post-war German engineers, some coerced into cooperation, documented the presence of partially functional systems and detailed instructions for their retrieval. A confidential 1952 US Army memorandum warned that the retrieval and study of these systems must be conducted under extreme secrecy to prevent Soviet discovery, underscoring the strategic value attributed to wartime German technology, even in the early Cold War context. Local reports during the construction phase indicated unusual phenomena. Villagers near Mittersill in Innsbruck described intermittent tremors, electrical disturbances affecting household appliances, and unexplained disappearances of laborers tasked with moving equipment. One 1952 Austrian police report, later declassified, mentions the sudden vanishing of 3 Alpine engineers, followed by the immediate closure of a valley site by military order. Intelligence officers reviewing these incidents at the time speculated that residual hazards from wartime munitions or unexploded ordnance might have contributed, but internal Army correspondence suggests concern about breaches in operational security. In several confidential interviews with surviving US Army officers in the 1980s, personnel recalled the pervasive tension and secrecy surrounding these installations, where deviation from protocol could result in reassignment or worse. Winterglass also incorporated a significant scientific and technical component. Teams of engineers and mathematicians, many recruited from former Wehrmacht communications units, analyzed recovered Axis radar and cryptography systems. Detailed schematics, technical logs, and photographic documentation were transmitted to Central Command under the highest classification. Internal studies suggest that some of the recovered systems included early attempts at frequency-hopping radar, interference-resistant transmission, and encrypted messaging methods far ahead of contemporary NATO capabilities. Anomalous notes in a 1953 intelligence summary refer to a sealed vault containing a system labeled AEG T1, which remains unopened in US archives, suggesting that the full technical extent of Winterglass's recovered equipment was deliberately left unexplored to limit risk and maintain plausible deniability. The geographic and climatic challenges of the Tyrolean Alps complicated operations. Harsh winters, avalanche-prone slopes, and limited access roads required logistical ingenuity. The 10th Signal Battalion developed modular shelters capable of rapid deployment, camouflage power units, and specialized antenna arrays capable of high-altitude operation. Maintenance rotations involved discrete helicopter insertions, and coordinated nighttime movements to prevent Soviet reconnaissance from detecting activity. Declassified documents from 1954 describe elaborate contingency plans for sealing installations in the event of discovery or accidental exposure, including the potential destruction of sensitive equipment using high explosives or remote detonation. Personnel security and operational secrecy were strictly enforced. All soldiers and contractors underwent background screening, with information compartmentalized according to need-to-know directives. Communication between Alpine sites and Munich command centers employed one-time pad encryption and coded teletype messages. Internal logs from 1953 note multiple instances where unauthorized personnel were intercepted, attempting to photograph or map sites, resulting in immediate removal and reassignment. The culture of secrecy extended to interactions with local populations, who were instructed that any military presence was part of standard post-war infrastructure rebuilding. Archival records indicate that these cover stories were meticulously maintained, with all local inquiries redirected through Central Command to prevent leaks. Despite its clandestine nature, Winterglass produced actionable intelligence. Intercepted Soviet communications revealed troop movements, artillery positions, and signals regarding Warsaw Pact exercises. Some documents suggest that Winterglass data influenced NATO strategic planning during the early 1950s, particularly with regard to reinforcement allocation in southern Germany and Austria. However, the most sensitive aspect of Winterglass remained the recovered Axis cryptologic systems. Reports indicate that detailed technical examinations were conducted on these devices, and components were occasionally transported to US laboratories in Frankfurt and Munich for controlled analysis. The continued classification of these findings prevented any public acknowledgement of the operation until selective. Declassification in the late 1980s, a particularly enigmatic component of Winterglass, involves a sealed mountain vault near the village of Lienz. Built by retreating SS engineers in 1945, the vault contained a series of unknown devices and encrypted materials. US Army intelligence chose not to open this vault, citing operational risk and potential hazards. Internal correspondence indicates the site was to remain undisturbed under Directive Echo 17-1, and surveillance continued without physical intervention. Villagers reported intermittent lights and faint vibrations emanating from the vault throughout the 1950s, but all external inquiries were suppressed. The restricted nature of the site has persisted, and documents pertaining to it remain among the most sensitive in surviving Army intelligence archives. Operation Winterglass exemplifies the intersection of technology, secrecy, and geopolitical tension in the early Cold War. The establishment of Alpine listening posts not only provided strategic insight into Soviet operations, but also facilitated the controlled recovery of advanced Axis technology. The meticulous planning, environmental adaptation, and operational security underscore the complexity of Cold War intelligence work, where scientific curiosity, military necessity, and political prudence collided. The operation's legacy persists in declassified reports, technical schematics, and the occasional anecdotal account from former personnel. Yet significant portions of the project remain obscured, leaving historians and intelligence analysts to reconstruct the narrative from fragments of archival evidence, technical documentation, and first-hand recollections of those who served in the shadows of the Alps. Chapter 5. The Drowned Files of Lake Toplitz. Between late 1944 and early 1945, SS units under the direction of the Reichssicherheitsdienst conducted a series of clandestine operations near Austria's Lake Toplitz, situated in the Salzkammergut region. The lake, known for its glacial depths and treacherous underwater terrain, became a repository for sealed crates containing a variety of wartime materials. While initially believed to house counterfeit British currency produced under Operation Bernhard, further investigation decades later revealed a far more complex and disturbing reality. Divers commissioned by the CIA and Bundesnachrichtendienst in the 1950s and 1960s reported anomalies inconsistent with paper notes, metallic vaults, encryption devices, and containers exhibiting unusual magnetic properties. Early reports noted diver fatalities, unexplained pressure malfunctions, and electric anomalies, suggesting the presence of technologically sophisticated equipment submerged deliberately to evade Allied and Soviet recovery efforts. Internal memoranda from the Bundesnachrichtendienst, dated 1958 and markt nur für den Dienstgebrauch, describe the lake as a potential repository for both intelligence and advanced military technologies. Magnetic anomalies and structural irregularities detected in sonar mapping suggested the presence of steel-reinforced vaults containing cryptographic machines, classified documents, and potentially portable chemical or biological agents. These findings correlated with recovered communications, indicating that the SS intended to preserve critical war materials in secure alpine locations, with Lake Toplitz functioning as a natural and difficult-to-access storage site. Correspondence between CIA operatives in Vienna and Washington, declassified decades later, confirms repeated requests to investigate the lake's depths, though all missions were conducted under strict operational secrecy due to both environmental hazards and Cold War political sensitivities. Eyewitness accounts collected from local fishermen and wartime laborers add further detail to the operation. Several recounted seeing barges carrying sealed crates being lowered into the lake under strict military supervision, guarded day and night by armed SS personnel. Interrogation reports of captured SS officers indicate that some materials included cryptographic equipment intended for high-level communication encryption, as well as metallic canisters containing experimental agents developed during late war research programs. In one recovered diary, an officer described the placement of unmarked containers, each labeled only with a serial number and sealed to withstand submersion, suggesting a calculated effort to obscure contents from anyone attempting post-war recovery. Such meticulous documentation contrasts sharply with the deliberate destruction of other records, reflecting a strategy of selective preservation and concealment. Reconnaissance and recovery attempts during the 1950s and 1960s further illustrate the dangers and mysteries surrounding Lake Toplitz. Multiple diver missions ended prematurely due to sudden depressurization of equipment and unexplained mechanical failures, while magnetic readings interfered with navigational instruments. A 1962 CIA report notes the discovery of metallic objects too dense to correspond with previously documented cargo, some of which were removed and examined in Vienna laboratories. These recovered items suggested the presence of advanced German engineering, possibly including encryption devices and secure storage vaults designed for wartime intelligence operations. However, the bulk of submerged material remained inaccessible, and official Austrian authorities restricted further exploration, citing safety concerns and diplomatic sensitivities. Analysis of partially recovered documents hints at the diversity of Toplitz's cargo. Some items included blueprints and engineering schematics for radar systems, cryptographic devices, and experimental communication arrays developed by the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine. Internal CIA cables reveal concern that sensitive technology could fall into Soviet hands if left unsecured, prompting attempts at limited retrieval under covert conditions. Memoirs from former intelligence officers describe the logistical and technical challenges of underwater recovery, noting the lake's extreme depth, cold temperatures, and oxygen deprivation risks. Even when crates were successfully brought to the surface, their contents were often heavily corroded, requiring delicate conservation methods in secure laboratories. The technical complexity and danger associated with these operations underscore the extraordinary measures taken to maintain the secrecy and integrity of Axis, materials human and political. Elements further complicated operations at Lake Toplitz. Local authorities were frequently excluded from recovery missions, and American, British, and Austrian operatives operated under a strict need-to-know protocol. Intercepted communications indicate that Soviet agents closely monitored activities around the lake, raising concerns that intelligence breaches could occur if secrecy faltered. Internal CIA directives emphasize the importance of minimizing public awareness, noting that even a single leaked detail could jeopardize the assessment of other alpine recovery sites. Declassified materials suggest that the Allied decision to limit exposure of Lake Toplitz operations was influenced as much by the strategic value of the technology as by concerns about post-war reputational or legal accountability. Documentation recovered from Toplitz further supports the existence of deliberate obfuscation and misinformation. Files discovered in CIA archives note that some crates contained decoy items intended to mislead observers and intelligence analysts. These decoys, combined with genuine cryptographic and technological materials, created ambiguity regarding the lake's actual contents. Some analysts later theorized that the mixture of counterfeit currency, intelligence hardware, and experimental equipment served dual purposes. preserving critical technological assets for potential post-war exploitation while concealing the true scope of Axis scientific initiatives. This operational complexity exemplifies the combination of military, intelligence, and political considerations driving the deliberate concealment of war materials in inaccessible locations. By the 1970s, renewed interest in Lake Toplitz emerged among historians and military researchers, fueled by declassified CIA reports and Bundesarchiv fragments. Sonar surveys and archival analysis suggested the presence of additional vaults and metallic containers not previously documented. However, safety concerns and diplomatic restrictions prevented extensive physical exploration. Internal communications from the Bundesnachrichtendienst underscore the lingering uncertainty regarding the lake's contents, noting that while some materials had been recovered, a significant portion likely remained submerged. The combination of natural hazards, technological complexity, and ongoing secrecy maintained the lake's status as one of the most enigmatic repositories of late-war Axis intelligence and technological assets. Lake Toplitz represents a convergence of wartime ingenuity, strategic concealment, and enduring mystery. Its sunken vaults reflect a deliberate attempt by the Third Reich to protect critical assets from both Allied and Soviet forces, while post-war recovery efforts highlight the challenges faced by intelligence agencies in navigating environmental, technological, and political constraints. Even decades later, the precise inventory, location, and ultimate fate of the lake's contents remain incompletely documented, leaving researchers with tantalizing fragments of a complex operation designed to preserve some of the most sensitive and potentially dangerous materials of World War II. The drowned files of Lake Toplitz continue to exemplify the intersection of secrecy, technology, and human endeavor in the final months of the Third Reich. The secrets of World War II are far from fully uncovered. Convoys lost in Arctic waters, cryptographic vaults sunk in alpine lakes, and human experiments meticulously erased from all official record continue to challenge historians and intelligence agencies alike. Even decades later, recovered fragments hint at the extraordinary lengths both Axis and Allied powers went to preserve, exploit, or conceal technological and human assets. As declassification progresses and new archival discoveries emerge, the shadows of operations like Harbinger, Unit 12, Winterglass, and the Lake Toplitz files remain, leaving open questions about what truly survived the war, who benefited, and what consequences were quietly absorbed by history itself.